I'm Caleb Bergfield.
And I'm Isaac Bergfield.
And we own Bergfield Brothers Custom Woodworking. And today we're going to show you how to make a pin. This business started as a 4-H project that has snowballed into a business. We're members of the Making Easy Riders 4-H club. We start out with a blank, which is usually about 5 inches long and between 1 inch by 1 inch or 3/4 of an inch by 3/4 of an inch. And we cut that down to size with the bandsaw to about the same size as our brass tubes, which is just a little over 2 inches. Using a straight edge, we mark the center of the blank, and we do this because when we drill the hole to put the tubes in, we want it to be straight all the way through so that the pin comes out straight. You can eyeball it after a while, but I like to mark it just to make sure. So the next step is to drill the hole. We use a drill press. You can use a regular drill, but the drill press makes a straight hole from top to bottom. And we use for this pin, we use a 7mm high-speed steel brad point bit. We use the brad point to mark where we're going to drill, just to make sure we're going through the right spot, like so. And then pull our table up and lock it down, and then drill it. Let's see if we went right through the middle. So there's where we went in, and that's where we came out. And we'll go ahead and do that same process on the second blank. Let's see if this one went through the center and came out the center. So that's where it started out, and that's where it ended up. So those look good to me. The next step is to glue the brass tubes in. The brass tubes are the skeleton of the pin, essentially. They are what hold the components to the pin. You use sandpaper to rough up the brass tubes so that the CA glue or whatever adhesive you use has something to adhere to. We use stick fast CA glue. There's other kinds of CA glue. You can use Gorilla Glue. You can use 5-minute epoxies. It's whatever you prefer, just as long as it holds strong. Alright, so the next step is to glue the tube in. And you want to make sure that you put the tube in the hole the same way that you drilled the hole, so that if you had any wiggle room with the drill bit, that the glue can fill that gap. Put a line right down the middle or the side of the brass tube. I like to put it in and twist it and make sure that every part of the brass tube is covered, and then you tap it down, and you want it to be just below the surface, but you don't want it sticking out the bottom. And we use activator to speed the process up. You don't have to, but it's just a preference. And then you do the same thing on the other tube. Put a line down it, put it in, and twist. You get glue on your fingers, but it comes off eventually. It's below, you just... Alright, so the next step is to barrel trim, and what that means is we are going to make the wood even with the tube that is in the blank. And we do that with a barrel trimmer, and all it is 4 blades that cut it's basically a planer. Makes it flat. And the shaft, it makes sure that the brass tube doesn't have any glue in it, so that when we go to put it together later, there's no obstructions. And we crank it up here. Again, we are going to make sure we go the same direction as we drilled. So. And you stop right when you can see the top of the tube. And now that part is ready. We have to do the other end. And there we have it. These are ready to be turned.
So now we have our pieces barrel trimmed, and we are going to turn them on the lathe. The lathe is just a drill press turned sideways, and it's going to spin really fast so that I can use my tools to shave it down to the size that I want. To prepare your piece for turning, you're going to take your bushings. They're just little pieces of metal that help guide the size of your wood, and then you'll take your first blank and you'll slide that right up next to the bushing. And when you barrel trimmed it, that made it flush so that the bushing can sit right on top of the brass tube. And then we're making a trim line bushing, or trim line pin. So you'll take your trim line bushing and you'll slide it up in between the two blanks. You'll place your second blank on the lathe, and then your final bushing. And then adjust your tailstock, which is this whole piece right here. You'll adjust that to where you want it, and then you'll tighten it down. You'll crank it down to where this has enough pressure on it that it won't slip when you're turning the pin. So once you have that secure, you'll adjust your tool rest to the height and distance that you prefer. So I'll tighten these down and make sure they're good. Okay. And then always use a face shield or some sort of goggles to protect your eyes and face. And I'm starting out with a carbide tip square tool to round the piece to a cylinder. And I'm going to go ahead and do that now. I'm going to adjust my speed so that I get a smoother cut. Here, if you can see, there's something called ghosting, and that's when the corners of the blank are not turned down all the way, and so they still have an edge, and I'm just getting rid of that. Once you get to about where you think it's round, take your tool and rest it on top. If you feel any vibration, it's not round yet, so you keep shaving it down. So our first piece is round, and now we're going to move on to the second one and make it look just like this. Cherry is a soft wood, so it's easier to turn. Unlike some woods like oak, they're a little harder, and it makes the turning a little bit more difficult. So our blanks are now round, and so we'll take a round carbide tool, just like our square, but it's round at the top, and we will shape the pin how we want it. And this pin is just going to be a flat from edge to edge. Sometimes I like to make it kind of lumpy or rigid to get a better grip on your pin. So I'll go ahead and shape it. Now that I got the shape that I want, I'm going to take the square piece and cut it down to from the edge of the bushing to the edge of the bushing. Now I got it cut down, and I'm going to switch back to my round tool and shave it down to just at the bushing. That will be the writing end. Now I'm going to work on the top part of the pen. Once again, I got my desired shape. Now I'm going to cut it down to a smaller size. Alright, now I'm going to clean up the edges with the round tool again. Alright, the shape of the pen is finished. Now I'm going to remove the tool rest and sand it. The sandpaper goes from 150 grit to 400 grit, and the different numbers of grit determine how deep the grooves go into the wood. And I'll start with 150 and continuously work my way up to 400. I like to turn my speed up so I get a smoother finish. And then just sand it down till it's smooth on both sides. You have to keep moving the sandpaper or else it will burn it and there will be no use for it anymore. After every grit of sanding that you do, you always want to sand it back and forth without the lathe moving, because the grain will get scratches in it if you don't. So I just do this a few times on each side, and then I will switch grits. Alright, so that's about smooth enough. So I'll get my 150 to my 240. This sandpaper will make it a little bit smoother, so I'll go ahead and start that. And as you go, your sandpaper will get full of dust, so if you have old denim jeans or sandpaper cleaner, you can just run it along your jeans and it will clean it off. And then once again, just sand it sideways a few times. Set that piece aside, work your way up from 240 to 320, and do it again. Another good reason to keep your sandpaper moving is if you don't, it will gouge the wood and you'll have a line that goes all the way through it. and it doesn't make the pen look as good. So sand sideways again to get those scratch marks out of it. Okay, put that piece aside, go to 400 grit. So I'm done with 400. Sand it sideways just a little bit. And the last grit, 600 grit, I like to turn my speed up just a little bit to get an even smoother finish. Right now I'm running at about 2,660 RPMs. Alright. The last grit doesn't have enough roughness to it that it gouges it, so I'm not going to worry about sanding it sideways. And I'll clean that out. And then you can use these strips of sandpaper 2 to 3 times.
Alright, now we're going to finish it. We use a CA glue finish, which when I get done, it will feel like glass. We also have another finish that we use. It's friction polish, and it goes on there, and you use the heat and the friction from the lathe to soak it into the wood. This is almost a plastic finish, is a good way to describe it, but it brings out the grain in the wood, and the grain is just the different. In a tree, when it grows up, there's rings that go around, and that's where you get the grain of your wood from. I use a paper towel to apply it, but you can use whatever, just as long as it doesn't leave any lint behind. Give it a shot of activator so that it cures. And then you put a second coat on. And spray it once again. And you let the lathe run for just a second and use the air from it to help cure it. And it feels really rough right now. But after I put this third coat on and use micro mesh, which is sandpaper that starts at 1500 grit and goes up to 12,000 grit, and it just gives it a nice glass smooth finish. Alright, now it's time to micro mesh it. And what micro mesh is a wet sandpaper. Wet sanding means you use water to remove the dust that gets trapped in the pores of the wood. And we start with 1500 grit. These are color coded. And you use warm water for your water. And when you sand, you get this slurry that is white, and that's just the CA glue coming off that you're sanding off that you just put on. And then you use a rag to wipe the slurry off of it, and then you move up to the next grit, which is 1800 grit. Make sure it's nice and wet. You wipe it off and go up to the next one, which is 2400 grit. And then 3200 grit. Unlike the sandpaper, you don't have to stop in between grits and sand with the grain, because you're not on grain, you're on the CA glue. So it really doesn't affect how the pin comes out. And then we move up to 36. And then 4,000 grit. and 6,000, 8,000, and last but not least, 12,000. And now it looks just like glass and feels just like glass. And the bad thing about using CA glue is the bushings get stuck to your work. So when we take it off of the pin mandrel, we kind of have to break it just a little bit. Okay, so you back this all the way up, and then see it's glued together. So we put it on the pin mandrel and you just break them off. It doesn't affect the finish a whole lot. We just take, it's got a rough edge on it, so we take a piece of sandpaper and we just clean that edge up just a little bit, and it is ready to be pressed together into a working pin.
Now we are ready to assemble the pin. You start by taking the writing end and the cap, or the tip, and you'll fit them together and place them in the pin press. A pin press is just a machine that helps you push them together easier, and you press the pin into the tip into the brass tubing until the wood meets up with the metal, and then set that aside. You take your top part and you take your clip and your cap and put them together, place them inside the pin, put them in the pin press just like this, adjust the press as needed, clamp it tight, press it together until the wood meets the metal again. And then the transmission, which is what makes the pen twist and the ink cartridge to go in and out. And this one is the tricky part because there's a little notch right there that you have to meet up with the edge of the pen, or else the ink cartridge will not go out far enough or come in far enough. And so you'll take your transmission, adjust your press again, fit it to where you need it, so right about there, and slowly press the pin together until the notch meets up with the wood. And then you always test fit it to make sure so that the tip comes out far enough. And then you twist it back to make sure it goes in. And then the trim of your pen will go right on top of the transmission. Slide that all the way down until it meets the metal or the wood. And you'll take the top part and do the exact same thing. And there you have your trim line twist pin. This is what our pin turned out to be, and this is how it started. So you can tell how much work was put in and the difference between the two.
I hope you enjoyed our pin making video. Come back next time and we'll make cutting boards on Bergfield Brothers Woodworking.